And President Trump teasing upcoming cuts to government programs as his White House is finding creative ways to keep funding for important food aid. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao brings us the latest on the government shutdown.
You want to know the truth? This is like a kamikaze attack. They have nothing to lose.
A stalemate is continuing into its seventh day as both Republicans and Democrats appear locked in their own positions. The White House on Tuesday announcing that it will use tariff revenue to continue funding federal food aid for mothers and young children, which otherwise will soon run out. Meanwhile, President Trump, again blaming Democrats for the shutdown, says he will soon unveil permanent cuts to some government programs.
But we have a lot of things that we're going to eliminate and permanently eliminate because of the shutdown, which I think they made a big mistake. We're able to take out billions and billions of dollars of waste, fraud, and abuse, and they've handed it, on a silver platter.
The White House has warned that thousands of federal workers could be permanently laid off due to the lapse in funding. It comes as a White House memo floats the idea of not paying furloughed federal workers for the time that they did not work during the shutdown. President Trump says it will depend on who we're talking about.
I can tell you this, the Democrats have put a lot of people in great risk and jeopardy, but it really depends on who you're talking about. But for the most part, we're going to take care of our people. There are some people that really don't deserve to be taken care of, and we'll take care of them in a different way.
Meanwhile, on trade, the president meeting with the Canadian Prime Minister at the White House. While the two leaders praise each other, they both acknowledge that natural business conflicts, given the two countries' proximity and also similar industries, are preventing a tariff deal and causing a tariff stalemate.
But we're competing for the same business. He wants to make cars, we want to make cars, and we're in competition.
So then what's holding things up? If he's a great man and you want to do a deal with Canada, why aren't you?
Because I want to be a great man, too.
The U.S. still has a 50% tariff on Canadian steel and aluminum, as well as other tariffs on some cars, lumber, and copper. That said, President Trump says the two countries are now working on a formula for a potential tariff deal. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
And Attorney General Pam Bondi testifying before the Senate for the first time since her confirmation hearing. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has the details of the heated hearing.
Even when the government is otherwise shut down because of the Democrats, the department's law enforcement officers and prosecutors are hard at work fighting crime, keeping our streets safe, and protecting you from the threats, foreign and domestic.
The main focus of today's hearing was Operation Arctic Frost. Senator Chuck Grassley, the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, released additional information on an FBI operation during the previous administration that spied on at least 50 conservative groups, and now we've learned that it also spied on at least 8 Republican lawmakers.
As to ending the weaponization of justice, we learned that former FBI secretly investigated you and your colleagues. Why? They wanted to take President Trump off the playing field. They were playing politics with law enforcement powers and will go down as a historic betrayal of public trust.
Democratic lawmakers defended the Biden administration while Republican senators outlined the numerous cases where the Department of Justice under the previous administration was weaponized against conservatives and in favor of Democrats.
President Biden retained President Trump's FBI Director Christopher Wray, who President Trump then fired. President Biden never directed the Attorney General to prosecute his political opponents. President Biden never fired his own political appointees for refusing to prosecute his targets.
So they pre-bunked the Hunter Biden laptop story. The American people should have been allowed to make their own judgments from that. Said it was Russian disinformation. We've heard that before. After Joe Biden comes in, 3 days in, they start a censorship campaign against the country, anybody who's a conservative.
Attorney General Pam Bondi also defended the Department of Justice's record in abiding with lower court orders despite the unprecedented number of injunctions fired by lower courts against the Trump administration.
We've been sued more than 400 times since January 20th. Judges have issued more than 90 temporary restraining orders against us, more than the previous several administrations combined. Despite the unprecedented degree of activism we've seen from the lower courts, we have never ignored a court order. And why would we? We have secured a historic 22 victories at the Supreme Court alone, with more to come.
Attorney General Pam Bondi confirmed that an investigation has been opened on Arctic Frost after whistleblower allegations that the FBI was spying on conservative activists and conservative lawmakers under the Biden administration for political purposes. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
And as Attorney General Pam Bondi faces questions about Operation Arctic Frost, joining us to unpack it all is Horace Cooper, constitutional scholar and senior fellow of the National Center for Public Policy Research. Horace, it's great to have you back with us.
Good to be here.
Thank you. I want to talk to you about this Arctic frost. It's really sort of unprecedented what we're seeing coming out of it. This was an investigation where the FBI seemed to have accessed, for now, cell phone data for 8 Republican senators, as well as representative on the House side. Specifically, they were gathering location and communication info, how long the calls were, who they were talking to, from January 4th to January 7th. I want to play a soundbite from Attorney General Pam Bondi.
Arctic frost was an unconstitutional, undemocratic abuse of power. During Arctic frost, the FBI also placed 92 linked Republican individuals and Republican groups, such as Charlie Kirk's Turning Point, on their list. This is the kind of conduct that shattered the American people's faith in our government.
Horace, talk to us about how significant this is and ultimately could be.
Well, this entire investigation of former President Trump before he was president and after he was president turns on the question of what's called predication. What was the basis for the activities? Now, what we heard today was that there was unleashed a very, very broad scope of assessment of the activities of these senators in terms of their communications. It's true that they didn't, quote, listen in on them, but what they did do was target them, track them, monitor them, and see who else they could contact. The question for all of us, and that the Justice Department is going to help us to get to, and I hope the Senate Judiciary Committee will answer, is what was the origin? That's what I mean by predication. Why did anyone think that this would have been appropriate? This apparently went before a grand jury. Were there no actual judges involved in such a broad and wide-scoped investigation?
I think something else concerning, Horace, is the fact that this was not readily available to the new administration. This was only brought to the surface by a whistleblower. By all accounts, it was buried somewhere, deeply hidden. Senator Chuck Grassley says that this Arctic frost investigation actually formed the basis for Jack Smith's elector case against President Trump. Could you help unpack that, what that actually might mean?
Jack Smith claimed that the president attempted to overturn the outcome of the 2020 election by making calls to find out whether or not the electors that were not awarded to him should possibly have been awarded to him. This sort of investigation says the very thing that the Supreme Court said that the Department of Justice cannot do. This said that you can parse out when the President of the United States acts in his presidential capacity, but does so improperly and under a criminal basis. Our landmark Supreme Court ruling that just came out last year said, no. If it is a presidential power, it can't be the basis for criminal action. Yet Jack Smith did this. One of the things that the Trump legal team did last year was ask, tell us what the specific behaviors are that are not part of the president's authority, and that was just simply refused. Even the judge overseeing the trial in D.C. refused to provide what that was.
Fascinating. As these reports continue to come out from about the political weaponization of government, AG Bondi is facing questions about clearing house and getting rid of a lot of the previous folks at the DOJ. Let's have another look.
What actions have been taken to hold DOJ officials accountable for their failures to manage the program and treat applicants with respect?
Chairman Grassley, as stated earlier, there have been many terminations from the Department of Justice, and we stand by all of those. Many of those are subject to active litigation.
So, Horace, as we all know, Washington, D.C., a lot of the institutions, typically the career, as they call them, the career employees, lean to the left. D.C. proper voted 92% for the Democratic candidate in the general election. What difficulties does Attorney General Pam Bondi face in terminating these career prosecutors, and what does the process need to look like legally?
Well, I was going to use a metaphor. They need to bring an Orkin team in and just get rid of a whole number of these individuals. In particular, it's very troubling that we've only had these few whistleblowers. Why didn't people stand up and say, I'm an attorney, I'm licensed as an officer of the court, I will not be party to these unconstitutional reviews, assessments, and activities in essentially an attack on the government of the United States. We didn't see that, and those who hold those important responsibilities, even if they're career, those people need to be removed.
Now, Horace, on that note, Pam Bondi today telling senators just how much pushback she's facing from within. Here's a look.
We've been sued more than 400 times since January 20th. Judges have issued more than 90 temporary restraining orders against us, more than the previous several administrations combined.
Talk to us about institutional inertia, and do you think that the goals of the Trump administration, the Trump agenda, if you will survive this sort of unprecedented pushback and level of litigation?
Well, it's interesting. We have a government shutdown, and the president keeps suggesting that that gives him enhanced leverage to remove people. If I were in his shoes, would focus on the Department of Justice and remove wholesale a large number of people. But there are other agencies where we're seeing individuals who are committed to thwarting the administration of Donald Trump. Those people, we should give them opportunities to demonstrate their opposition so that they can be removed. Something like a perp walk for the former FBI director, there were at least one individual, maybe two, who refused to participate. Why? Because they didn't agree that should be the policy. That was a sign that those people needed to be removed. Thankfully, AG Bondi did.
Now, lastly, I want to get your perspective on one last thing. An upcoming Supreme Court case will decide if states are allowed to ban the licensed counselors, as they're calling them, from discussion that aims to change a minor's self-identified sexual orientation or gender. Talk to us about this.
All right. This is a radical policy. It started in California, but it's moved to more than 20 states, where the state government tells the therapist, you may not treat this type of diagnosis, and we're going to take your license from you. We could fine you up, in the case of Colorado, we could fine you up to $5,000. What is the justification for the state getting in between the therapist and the patient? In this case, it's about gender identity, but according to what the arguments that were made by the state of Colorado today, it could actually be any matter that the state of Colorado disapproved of. California says that we believe these activities or materials are cancer causing, and they put that label on. Apparently, the Colorado Attorney General and the state of Colorado believe that they could say that about any type of mental health treatment. I don't believe that this is going to stand. I don't know that this is so much a free speech issue. I do believe that it's a case of government overreach, and it's also a case of infringing upon the religious expression of a therapist who uses their role to express their faith as well as treat people.
Horace Cooper, as always, really appreciate your expertise and insights.
Thank you.
Thank you. And as the Supreme Court today signals it may strike down this new Colorado law, NTD's Arlene Richards takes a closer look.
The Supreme Court justices today tackled a very narrow issue that pegs a healthcare provider's state licensing requirements against free speech rights. A licensed counselor is appealing 2 lower court decisions that ruled a Colorado regulation that bans healthcare providers from convincing transgender youths to return to their biological sex is lawful. She claims that she helps people by talking with them, and that many of her clients seek her counsel because their faith aligns with the religious aspects of her therapy. A confusing issue before the court was the distinction between laws that regulate conduct or standard of care and laws that regulate what a healthcare provider can say to the patient. The attorney for the counselor said this isn't a case about his client's conduct, but rather her practice of talking to patients, which he said is all she does.
As this court talked about in NIFLA, when speech is incidental to regulated conduct, then that changes the analysis. And so if we were in the medical context and there was something like administering drugs, performing procedures, conducting examinations, that would take it outside of the arguments we're making.
He explained that speaking to a client for therapy purposes is different from talking to a patient about what medications to take, and therefore the state's licensing regulations on standard of care didn't apply in this case. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson wasn't sold on the argument.
I guess I'm still just struggling with whether a therapist who is acting in their professional capacity to help someone achieve their goals is really expressing the kind of message or expressing a message for First Amendment purposes.
Colorado's Solicitor General argued that the standard for a licensed healthcare provider is different from what's expected of an unlicensed minister or life coach.
It is the relationship between a healthcare provider and the patient that establishes this special context. And again, if you go to a life coach or you go to someone else, they're not licensed by the state. You're not expecting them to be complying with standards of care. You have a different expectation.
Several justices pushed back because they wondered whether the state's law imposed viewpoint discrimination. In other words, allowing the licensed counselor to talk about one thing but not another.
It seems to me your statute dictates opposite results in those 2 situations based on the viewpoint expressed. One viewpoint is the viewpoint that a minor should be able to obtain talk therapy to overcome same-sex attraction if that's what he or she wants, and the other is the viewpoint that the minor should not be able to obtain talk therapy to overcome same-sex attraction, even if that is what he or she wants.
A life coach or a minister would be able to talk about both. The court addressed other arguments, including whether the counselor had standing to challenge the law and what standard of review they should apply. In a separate case on Tuesday, the justices heard arguments over whether a court can impose 2 criminal sentences for one act of crime. It's a question that divides 7 federal court circuits. Arlene Richards, NTD News.